Sometimes the amount of hypocrisy in society is a little overwhelming, so I'm going to indulge a bit in a rant video. And my regular viewers may be interested in some of the topics covered in the later half of the video, even if you're not interested in the case of the 3 girls kidnapped in Ohio. And also, it doesn't escape me that making a video ranting about hypocrisy is probably an indication of my own repressed hypocrisies. So by now probably everyone has heard of the horrifying case of the 3 girls kidnapped and held captive for 10 years in Ohio. The problem is that this exact same thing, and worse, happens to tens of thousands of girls each year in South Asia. In fact, the 3 girls in Ohio had it relatively better off than most girls in their situation, because most girls in their situation are not only kidnapped and enslaved, but forced to work in the general sex industry, so they're often dead from abuse and disease well before 10 years. Now, apart from the obvious hypocrisy of a double standard here, there's the more subtle, absurd hypocrisy that Oprah and every other media shill are going to be falling all over themselves to interview these 3 girls from Ohio. Why? Not because the public cares so much as they hypocritically claim to, but because people want titillation. Let me repeat that. The story of the 3 girls in Ohio is so popular, not because people, and you if you found this video through a keyword search, actually care, but because people want titillation, and they want to be able to hypocritically claim that they care. You see, if people, and you, actually cared, then shills like Oprah would be constantly running to South Asia to investigate the problem of slavery there. But that rarely happens. It doesn't happen because it's no fun to investigate an ongoing problem, because then you might feel compelled to actually do something, and that's the last thing on most people's mind. So most media sellouts shut up about the reality of tens of thousands of enslaved women, and most people like to pretend that it doesn't exist. In fact, almost no one takes effective action. Even in the so-called anti-slavery groups, a disturbing number of activists talk about the problem and then ask for donations so that they can pay themselves a salary to continue raising awareness by talking about the problem. That in itself could almost be considered a form of exploitation and making money off of titillation. Effective solutions are being implemented by almost no one. One of the most effective solutions I've seen is investigating the problem and then impelling local law enforcement to act. But few groups do this because it's dangerous, difficult, and not nearly as lucrative as simply talking about the problem and then asking for a donation. So if you do care about the problem of kidnapping and slavery and you agree with this more active approach, you can contact a group called Freedom Firm. Link is below. It's one of the few anti-slavery groups, ironically, which actively involves itself in freeing people from slavery. It's surprisingly cost-effective to free someone from slavery and attempt to prosecute the perpetrators in order to discourage the practice. And by the way, thank you to everyone who donated last time. Along with my matching, we probably freed 2 to 3 people from slavery, which is something to really feel good about. But since this is a rant about hypocrisy, let me ramble off onto a vaguely related topic, because there's another instance of hypocrisy here which is adding to the problem. You see, the reason that nobody, and I mean effectively nobody, gives a damn that tens of thousands of girls are enslaved in South Asia every year is that these girls are then forced to work in the sex industry, and people get to pretend that they're prostitutes. Just to be clear, the definition of a prostitute is someone who voluntarily chooses to sell themselves. But prostitution has a bad connotation, and so by conflating slavery with prostitution, people get to rationalize their inaction. Which brings me to the next absurd hypocrisy, people looking down on prostitutes. A prostitute is someone who sells themselves for money, and there are very few people who don't sell themselves or sell out to varying degrees. For example, most people consider money when they're choosing a career, and I'm sorry to break it to you, but if you're doing a job that you don't love, you're a prostitute. Most people also consider money, at least, when they're choosing a partner or a spouse. Now, I'm not saying that selling yourself is so terrible, although it may not be optimal to do, especially for your entire life, but the unforgivable sin that prostitutes commit is having the audacity to be honest about selling themselves. You see, the more hypocritical we are, the more we hate honesty in anyone else. You see this kind of thing all the time. Who hates homosexuals? Men with repressed homosexual urges. Otherwise, why would you care what somebody else does? And this is the irony of society, that it's generally the sickest people who are most obsessed with controlling everyone else. If someone has sexual repression, they're always obsessed with controlling everyone else's sexuality. If someone has messed up finances, they're always obsessed with controlling everyone else's finances and taxing and regulating everyone else. It's generally the sickest people who most try to control others as a way of deflecting from their own problems. But this rant wouldn't be complete until I cover one more group that really needs to hear it. Because I imagine many of my viewers, as myself, are basically libertarians, and we're probably feeling pretty pleased with ourselves because we don't have this pathological need to control other people. In fact, libertarians love to point out the many hypocrisies of forced socialism. For example, that it isn't really caring when you see someone suffering, but then go and steal from someone else to help the poor person that's suffering, just so that you can assuage your own conscience for your guilt of doing nothing. And that's, of course, being kind to the socialists, many of whom just want to implement programs that ultimately help themselves and pretend that they're doing it to help someone else. For example, glorious socialized medicine somehow never gets extended to include third world countries where it would really do some good. So as libertarians, we're often very pleased with ourselves for not trying to hypocritically pass off our own obligations onto the rest of society, or worse yet, obligate society to support us. But here's the hypocrisy. Just as many forced socialists expect others in society to stand up for their obligations, many libertarians expect the rest of society to stand up for individual rights, or worse yet, expect the rest of society to stand up for the individual rights of the libertarian. That's why so many socialists and libertarians spend so much time discussing what the government should do, because by the government they mean what other people should do to help them. And that's the hypocrisy of both socialists and libertarians frequently. They're always talking about what other people should do and not focusing on what they should do to fix their own situation, to protect their own rights, or to fix their own economic situation, much less what they can do to help other people, to help protect other people's rights, or to help other people economically. If you're a libertarian but you've never done anything to protect the rights of anyone else, then you're not only hypocritical but a little bit delusional when you complain that your rights are being violated and you expect anyone to care. And for the people who have lasted so far through this rant, this brings us full circle back to the case of the 3 girls kidnapped in Ohio. If you don't really care about this type of horrendous human rights violation, then the best thing you can do is stop wasting your time on titillation. But if you do actually care, and I mean care enough to forego the cost of a cup of Starbucks coffee, then you might consider giving a few dollars to a group like Freedom Firm so that this kind of thing happens less often in the future.